We're covering the murder trial of Brooks Houck, the man accused of killing his girlfriend Crystal Rogers in Bardstown, Kentucky. After nearly a decade of investigation, Houck is finally facing a jury for the July 2015 disappearance and presumed murder of 35-year-old mother of five. Now, no cameras are allowed in the courtroom and it is not streaming. So, what I've done is gathered a bunch of the live blogs, put them all together to try to give you an update. But first, we're going to begin with some summaries, maybe even some of his interrogation that he had. Let's get started. The trial began this week in Bowling Green, with opening statements painting two completely different pictures of what happened to Crystal. The prosecution alleges a calculated family conspiracy involving Brooks, his mother Rosemary, his brother Nick, who is a former Bardstown police officer. The defense claims there's zero physical evidence connecting their client to any crime. But before we dive into testimony, let's establish the foundation that has captivated true crime followers for years. Crystal vanished July 3rd, 2015, from the small town of Bardstown, Kentucky, a community that's been plagued by a disturbing series of unsolved murders and mysterious deaths over the past decade. Crystal shared her home with Brooks and their 2-year-old son Eli, along with her 4 other children from previous relationships. The last confirmed sighting of Crystal alive was when she and Brooks took their son to the Houck family farm on the evening of July 3rd. Brooks claimed they returned home around midnight, where Crystal played on her phone while he went to bed. He says he woke up Saturday morning to find her gone, but he never reported her missing. 2 days later, Crystal's maroon Chevy Impala was discovered abandoned on the Bluegrass Parkway with a flat tire. The keys were missing, but her purse and cell phone remained inside. That abandoned car would become the starting point for one of Kentucky's most extensive missing persons investigations. What made this case particularly complex was the immediate conflicts of interest. Brooks' brother Nick was a Bardstown police officer at the time of Crystal's disappearance. This connection forced the FBI to take over the investigation, and they've spent years conducting searches of the Houck family farm while building what they believe is a murder case. The case gained national attention, not just because of Crystal's disappearance, but because Bardstown had become synonymous with unsolved violence. Officer Jason Ellis was ambushed and killed in 2013. Tommy Ballard, Crystal's father, who never stopped searching for her, was shot and killed while hunting in 2016. Kathy and Samantha Netherland were brutally murdered in their home in 2014. And while these cases have not been linked, the pattern of violence in such a small town raised questions about exactly what was happening there. Brooks became the prime suspect pretty much immediately, and it's not hard to understand why. His timeline for July 3rd contained multiple contradictions that investigators couldn't reconcile. He claimed to have had conducted business at various locations that day, but business owners later would contradict his statements. Most damaging was the phone evidence. Brooks told police Crystal was playing on her phone when he went to bed after midnight, but digital forensics showed her phone was shut off at 9:27 p.m., making his story impossible. Prosecutor Jim Lewinsky opened with an explosive allegation. This is premeditated murder orchestrated by the Houck family. According to prosecution, Rosemary approached construction worker Danny Singleton 5 weeks before Crystal's disappearance and asked if he could find someone to, quote, get rid of Crystal. When Singleton allegedly responded that with enough money, you can get anything done, the prosecutors told the jury this was the beginning of the conspiracy to kill Crystal. The prosecution's theory is that Brooks lured Crystal to the family farm on July 3rd under the pretense of a romantic evening. But instead, she was on that farm, and that's where she died. They allege Brooks had dark window tint installed on his truck days before her disappearance, and that Steve and Joseph Lawson were paid to move Crystal's car to the Bluegrass Parkway. Perhaps the most chilling was the allegation that family members recorded court proceedings as they testified before the grand jury. The prosecutor claimed that they wanted to make sure everybody was towing the line and keeping to the same story. Testimony came from Detective Tim O'Donnell as well. He's a digital forensic expert with the Louisville Metro Police. Using GPS, Wi-Fi, and cellular data from Google location records, O'Daniel testified that Brooks was at the family farm from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. on July 3rd. That directly contradicts Brooks' statement to police, where he details visiting various businesses that day. The defense didn't challenge this until the phone data come up, which essentially destroys Brooks' alibi for the day that Crystal disappeared. O'Daniel also testified that Steve Lawson called Brooks at 12:07 a.m. on July 4th, with the call originating near the area where Crystal's car was later found. Now, there's a neighbor, Mary Mattingly. She lived across the street from Brooks and Crystal, and she provided some testimony at the trial as well. She described seeing Nick and Rosemary at the house after Crystal disappeared, watching as Nick pulled the car into the driveway in his police cruiser, with Rosemary following in the car. According to Mary, they positioned the vehicle so that the trunks faced the basement. She then saw Nick grab 4 bags and put them in his mother's car. Even more disturbing, she testified that she saw Rosemary digging up flowers that Crystal had recently planted, which seems extremely strange. Why would she be doing that? Crystal's daughter, Kaylee, also spoke. She was only 14 when her mother disappeared. She testified that she had a very good relationship with Brooks before Crystal gave birth to Eli, but things changed immediately afterwards. The day that Crystal disappeared, when Kaylee came home needing a dress for church, she found Brooks in the bedroom and asked where her mother was. He told her Crystal was out with Sabrina, who's a family member. And this testimony is significant because it shows Brooks providing an explanation for Crystal's absence rather than expressing any concern that she had disappeared. However, some of the prosecution's key witnesses have serious credibility issues that the defense is exploiting. Danny Singleton's testimony about Rosemary Houck soliciting a hitman is explosive, but his credibility is compromised. He didn't mention this conversation to anyone until after he was arrested and charged with perjury in December of 2015, facing up to 20 years in prison. It was only after investigators visited him in jail in April of 2016 that he first told this story about Rosemary asking him to find someone to get rid of Crystal. After agreeing to a plea deal where charges were amended to misdemeanors, he was released from jail, and under cross-examination, he acknowledged drinking heavily and using drugs in 2015. The timing of his cooperation, only after facing decades in prison, does raise serious questions about whether his testimony was bought with leniency. Another person, Heather Snellen, Steve Lawson's former girlfriend, testified that she overheard Steve and Joseph talking about moving a body at the Houck farm with a skid steer, and that was in 2017. But the circumstances under which investigators obtained this statement are troubling. Court transcripts revealed that Kentucky State Police subjected Snellen to over 4 hours of interrogation. making what can only be described as threats about her child and freedom. Quote, "Your life is pretty good. It can stay that way if you tell us everything you know. When you come off with it, then you get to go home with your son. I don't want to have to take your little boy from you." Now, Snellen was on drugs supplied by Joseph Lawson when she allegedly heard this conversation, and she didn't tell police about it when first interviewed by the FBI in 2021 because she said she did not want to be involved. She later provided a written statement saying she felt pressured into saying things, and she didn't know what happened to Crystal beyond what she'd seen on TV. So, this type of coercive interrogation tactic can raise serious questions about the reliability of her testimony and whether investigators cross the lines to obtain statements supporting their theories. Now, the defense strategy. Steve Schuring is taking a more straightforward approach. There's simply no evidence, despite thousands of hours of investigative work costing millions of dollars over a decade, he argued. They can't prove either defendant had anything to do with Crystal's disappearance, and they point to several pieces of evidence that don't fit into the prosecution's narrative. A fingerprint on Crystal's cell phone that doesn't match anyone in the Houck or Lawson families. A palm print on Crystal's car that also doesn't match. 2 hairs found in Crystal's vehicle that prosecutors didn't test because they were too long to match any male suspects. No evidence that Crystal's car had been wiped clean after being abandoned. For each piece of the prosecution's circumstantial case, the defense offers an alternative explanation. Brooks had his windows tinted because his son had an eye condition, making him sensitive to light. Nick had his phone turned off that weekend because he was fighting with his girlfriend. The blanket conversation between his family members was worry about being under scrutiny, not evidence tampering. Most significantly, the defense is arguing that investigators were so fixated on the Houck family that they ignored any possible suspects and any evidence that didn't specifically fit their predetermined narrative. One of the most suspicious pieces of evidence came from Marcela Ray, who owned Radio Shack in Bardstown. She testified that Brooks came into her store on July 6th, just 3 days after Crystal disappeared, specifically asking for the best audio recording device that she had. Ray said she printed out a photo of Brooks holding the recorder with his son because the interaction stood out to her. She testified that every time his son would lift his head, Brooks would tell him to put it down. The testimony becomes even more significant when viewed alongside what happened during Brooks's police interview. During his July 8th police interview, Brooks was seen adjusting something in his pocket that Detective Snow later identified as an audio recording device. Snow testified that had Brooks asked, he would have told him it was fine to record it. The prosecution argues that this shows Brooks was being deceptive and potentially recording his statements to share with his family members later, supporting their conspiracy theory. The defense presented phone records showing that Brooks did attempt to contact Crystal after she disappeared, countering the prosecution's claim that he showed no concern. Defense attorney Steve Schuring said phone records show Brooks tried calling her twice on July 4th and once on the 5th. Snow said it appeared those calls went to voicemail, but investigators don't believe he actually left any voicemail. This evidence cuts both ways. The defense used it to show Brooks was concerned, while the prosecution points out that only 3 brief calls over 2 days is remarkably small for someone whose partner has vanished. Perhaps the most explosive new testimony came on Friday, shifting focus from Brooks to his co-defendant, Joseph Larson. A witness testified that she heard Steve and Joseph Lawson talking about their involvement in Crystal's disappearance, with the witness saying she heard from Lawson that he and his father helped move Crystal's body. And that was the first time a witness had directly implicated Lawson in hiding her remains, not just moving the car. The testimony suggested that Lawsons weren't just paid to relocate Crystal's vehicle, they were allegedly involved in the disposal of her body as well. Several other witnesses provided testimony that paints a disturbing picture of the days following Crystal's disappearance. Richie Riggs, who lived next door to Rogers and Brooks, mentioned that Crystal had been concerned Brooks was going to move her out. And she said Crystal had accused him of cheating on her. While the judge instructed the jury to disregard the infidelity allegation, the testimony about Crystal fearing eviction suggests relationship problems that Brooks denied. Ashley Nally, who worked with Brooks, testified that Rogers wasn't her cup of tea, but was a good mother who was never away from Eli, her son. Nally asked Brooks why he never left Crystal, and he said he would never lose Eli. This testimony suggests Brooks' primary concern was maintaining custody of his son rather than his relationship with Crystal. Several other pieces emerged that further implicated the defendants. Crystal's relationship troubles. There were texts from April of 2015, about 6 weeks before she disappeared, showing some serious issues. Crystal texted Brooks, quote, "I cannot deal with the way you treat me anymore. I'm tired of always being on the back burner." Brooks responded, quote, "Please come back home. Running from your problems won't fix them." This contradicts Brooks' claims to police that they had no significant relationship issues. Brooks' statement about custody, Christina Hawley, a friend of both Crystal and Brooks, testified about a disturbing conversation before Eli was born. When Hawley mentioned that it would be hard to get a child away from the mother if the parents weren't together, Brooks responded, quote, "I have enough money to do it." This statement takes on a more sinister meaning, given the prosecution's theory that Brooks killed Crystal to gain sole custody. William Gunther. His testimony, he was a Lowe's employee who drove to the Bluegrass Parkway nightly after work. He testified that on July 3rd around 10 p.m., he saw Crystal's car on the right shoulder with the flashers on and no one in or around it. This places the car at the abandonment site on the very night Crystal disappeared, not the next day as previously believed, and that significantly tightened the timeline for the defendants. So, this case so far, and in general, is representative of something larger than the one murder trial, even though that is what everybody wants and needs justice for. For Bardstown, this is kind of whether justice can finally be served in a community that has been plagued with these things. For Crystal's family, who lost both Crystal and her father. It's about getting answers after an entire decade of nothing. The prosecution faces the challenge of proving a murder case without a body, which there's no crime scene, and the key witnesses, their credibility has been severely compromised. And they're asking this jury to convict based on circumstantial evidence, digital forensics, and testimony. The defense is arguing that the investigators simply had tunnel vision early on and built the entire theory around that specific bias. Brooks is facing life if convicted on charges on this. So his co-defendant, Joseph Lawson, faces conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. After 10 years, this trial will force a jury to examine everything that they have and have gathered over the past decade. And I don't know, can the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Brooks orchestrated the murder? Or will the lack of physical evidence result in an acquittal for a man who's been the prime suspect for a decade. I'm going to keep up with this entire thing and probably every couple of days bring you the updates on exactly what is going on.